made a promise a few podcasts ago that if material was going to be challenging or disturbing, then I would give a warning. Well, this is challenging material, so if you don't want to be challenged, don't listen to this. Because it is quite disturbing, the notion that there is no self. And I'll be quoting from quite a few people. And the evidence is fairly overwhelming, both in terms of traditional philosophies and also in terms of modern neuroscience. So switch off now if you do not want to be told that you do not have a self. So I want to start with a quote from a book called The Ceasing of Notions. It's described as a Zen text from the Tun Huang caves. It's a book I've had most of my life. And if you want to dispel all your illusions very, very quickly, then this is the book to read. Although, reading isn't enough, obviously, you have to realize it within yourself. But anyway, let me start at the beginning of the book. The whole book is a dialogue between Eman, who is a student, and the master. The name of the master isn't given, but this is how it starts. The master sat silent and said nothing. Eman suddenly rose and asked, "What is called mind? And how is the mind pacified?" The master answered, "You should not assume a mind, and then there is no need to pacify it. This is called pacifying the mind." There you go. There's almost nothing else that need to be said in truth. Those guys are just such hard asses. They just went straight to the core of it, no messing about. But I'm going to elaborate. In good old contemporary Western tradition, I'm going to elaborate and try and describe and effectively validate what has just been said. So let me start with a guy called Thomas Metzinger, who I've mentioned in previous podcasts. He wrote a book called The Ego Tunnel. And Metzinger himself is a philosopher, but he calls upon a whole pile of contemporary neuroscience to legitimize what he's saying. And what he's saying is that there is no self. Now, let's just talk about this sense of self that we all have. Every morning when we wake up, we kind of recognize who we are. It would be a fairly interesting and probably disturbing event to wake up every morning and find that we're somebody else, wouldn't it? So this sense of who we are is a strange thing, but actually a character called Antonio Damasio, who is a neuroscientist, has found that there is a part of the brain, and I should add that Damasio is a Spinoza fan. In fact, he's written a book about Spinoza. Anyway, he's found that there is a part of the brain, at the base of the brain, that is effectively a map of your body. And it is this map of the body that gives us our sense of self. How do we know this? Well, this part of the brain can become damaged. And if it becomes damaged, then a person loses the sense of self, which is extremely disturbing for that person. As you might imagine, every morning they wake up, they're a new person. Just a dreadful situation to be in. So this sense of self is actually located in the brain and is a map, effectively, of your body. How did Damasio get onto this research? Well, he called upon Spinoza. Oddly enough, I've mentioned he was a Spinoza fan. Spinoza said the mind is the idea of the body. And I'm not going to explain that because it would take too long, but in Spinoza's world there are two dimensions for men. One is the dimension of mind and the other one is the dimension of body. And what he's saying is that the mind is the idea of the body. You could read it as the mind is the map of the body. Hence the work that Damasio has done. And we have a sense of memory as well. So we have memory which gives us this sense of continuity. But memory is mainly full of rubbish. It's full of things that are easy to remember, things that are impactful, and things that are unique. And if something in your life doesn't qualify in that way, then you don't remember it. So this memory that you have, this sense of continuity, is just wholly distorted. There's nothing in there that is what might be called a true and objective picture of your life. You're just remembering things that are easy to remember, that are impactful, and that are unique. Depending on what random events happen to qualify for that, that is the sense of yourself you create as a continuous entity. And it's wholly a fiction. So, from the point of view of neuroscience, we live in a world that we simulate, or that our brain simulates. Show me something that your brain isn't simulating. You can't. Everything you know, everything you touch, smell, see, hear, taste, is a simulation of your brain. You cannot step outside of it. And the weird thing is that the brain creates a simulation that creates itself. Sorry, that includes itself, which is the strangest thing of all. But also, this sense of self, this sense of I, which is linked to this part of the brain I mentioned earlier, the one that Antonio Damasio has researched. This is linked to a simulation within the simulation, and this is the simulation of yourself. So in effect, this notion, this feeling, this idea of self is a simulation within the broader simulation that we call reality. Did warn you. Let me at this point quote U.G. Krishnamurti. U.G. Krishnamurti would probably qualify as a modern Zen master, although he would hate being called that. But he said, "There is no self. There is no I. There is no spirit. There is no soul. And there is no mind. That knocks off the whole list, and you have no way of finding out what you are left with. Ideas of soul and life after death are born out of the demand for permanence. That's the basis of man's religious thinking. All religious thinking is born out of the demand for permanence. When you actually do see and perceive for the first time that there is no self to realize, no psyche to purify, no soul to liberate, it will come as a tremendous shock to that instrument. You have invested everything in that, the soul, mind, psyche, whatever you wish to call it, and suddenly it is exploded as a myth. It is difficult for you to look at your actual situation. One look does the trick. You are finished." He doesn't pull his punches, that guy. There are lots of U.G. Krishnamurti videos on YouTube. If you want to get a taste of reality, then watch some of them. In fact, some of them are quite funny because he can be extraordinarily aggressive with people, just like the old Zen masters were in actual fact. And there's one of some guy talking about helping the world, and Krishnamurti just lays into him like nothing. Anyway, so that was Krishnamurti. You've heard from The Ceasing of Notions, the Zen book I've mentioned. You've heard from Metzinger. Now let me talk about Spinoza. Because in his book called The Ethics, Spinoza pretty well unwinds everything that we think we are. Spinoza is not, hasn't been traditionally liked all that much by the academics, because the fifth part of his book is a little bit mystical in places. But anyway, in part 2 of the Ethics, he talks about the nature of mind. And what you have to understand, and this ties in very well with Krishnamurti, is that for Spinoza, what our mind is, or what it is populated with, is ideas. Where do those ideas come from? Well, they come from our experience in life to a large extent. Not entirely, but mainly from there. Education, parents, whatever we experience with peers, and so on. So, as Krishnamurti says, what we call our mind is actually just a whole set of programming. And in Spinoza's terms, you could say it's a whole collection of ideas that we've ingested. There's nothing in there to call you or me. There's just a whole pile of these ideas that we've pulled in. Some of the ideas will be affirming for us, so you're a clever person, well done, yeah. And then there'll be some ideas that are not very affirming. So, what a dumbass you are. If you're told that repeatedly when you're young, then you're probably going to grow up with problems. Anyway, nonetheless, our understanding is all the ideas that we have ingested. Many of these ideas will be confused and incorrect, but nonetheless, we've ingested them. Now, what a lot of people think they are is the will, the ability to choose this or that. But Spinoza has none of that. He says, depending on this stratum of ideas that you've ingested, the understanding, when a new idea is presented to you, it will either fit in with your existing ideas or it won't. So, for example, if I tell you the moon is made of green cheese, you're probably going to negate that. And you're going to say, well, I've told you that that's wrong. But actually, the only reason you can negate it is because you've got this stratum of understanding where somewhere in your life you've been told that the moon is made out of rock and it's a big thing and it's, whatever. So based on this stratum of understanding that you have, that you, to a large extent, have had no control over programming. Your parents, society, religion, education, all those things have programmed this understanding of yours. And this is exactly what Krishnamurti says we are. We are this programming, nothing else. So whenever you then are presented with a new idea, or a new stimulus, you will measure that against this stratum of programming that you have, that you call yourself. It isn't yourself, it's just literally a whole pile of programming. So Spinoza in no way tolerates any of this. And if you are a Spinoza person, if you know about Spinoza, then you look at propositions 48 and 49 in part 2 of his Ethics. But he says things like, and I'm not going to read these propositions because they probably mean nothing to most people. You have to study this stuff for years to suck the juice out of it. But anyway, there are some bits that are fairly understandable. So he says, in the same way it is proved that there is in the mind no faculty of understanding, desiring, loving. All these properties we think we have, the ability to understand, the ability to love, the ability to hate, whatever, they're not there. Or what Spinoza says is there are just specific instances of hating or liking or loving or understanding something. There's no faculty within us to do those things. So where does this experience of loving something come from? Well, it's very simple. You have your substratum of understanding, which is your programming in life. You are presented with a new idea, a new object, maybe some person, and if they accord with all this programming that you have within you, and it makes it all feel very nice and so on, then you'll love that person. For Spinoza, by the way, love is synonymous with pleasure, which is another blow round the head for all the New Age and spiritual types. But so it's a one-by-one experience. There is no thing in there. There's no part of your psyche or whatever that understands or loves or whatever. It's just this constant presentation of new images, new ideas, new phenomena, and that either fits in with your programming or it doesn't. Simple as that. And of course, the more you experience, the more you get programmed. So, contemporary research, Renaissance philosophers, the old Zen masters, and so on, all say that we have no self. That is, if, as Krishnamurti says, you only have to see that and you're finished. It's actually incredibly liberating. Most people cling to the desire to have something permanent within them. Personally, I can think of nothing worse. So, after all of that, what do? Well, that's the thing. You don't do anything. You just sit back and put your feet up and go with the ride. And that's the essence of the whole thing.